But sclerenchyma or a similar type of tissue may. So we're going to look at what we have in animals which are going to assist in structure and support and also movement to be able to get from A to B. So we're looking at part 1, which clearly tells you that there are 2 or 3 or 4 parts to come. Okay, so we look at the skeletons. Now remember, plants have an internal skeleton that consists of strengthening tissue. You've learned all about the xylem and the sclerenchyma. Okay, that's what keeps them upright, and that's also what's going to get water in those huge trees that are 30, 40 meters high from the soil all the way to the tippy leaves. Now, animals, well, guess what? Animals have to move from one point to another. Why? They need to find food, they need to find shelter, they need to find mates, and if they happen to be swimming around in an ocean, they need to be able to find food. Is their primary issue is food. All right, now, the simplest invertebrates have specialized cells and tissue to assist them to move. Okay, just like the plants had strengthening tissue, they have to have specialized tissue as well. Structure and support in the body is very important for movement. So the way the structure is going to determine how that organism is able to move. For example, we have 3 types of skeletons that you need to study specifically. One is a hydrostatic skeleton. Hydro means water, so it's filled with water or liquid. Then we have an endoskeleton is inside, and guess what? An exoskeleton is outside. So people, a lot of the words here that you're going to be learning now are words you either already know or you can make sense of. So if we look at a hydrostatic skeleton, it has to do with liquid or water. The fluid that fills a cavity in the center of an animal is called the coulomb. Like we're going to look at an earthworm, and that's what we have inside the earthworm is a coulomb. It's a cavity that runs all the way through. Enclosed by muscles of the body wall, the fluid presses against the muscles. Okay, and as the muscles contract, this internal cavity that's filled with liquid now, the muscles are going to contract. It's going to push that liquid to another place. It creates pressure, and it's that pressure of the fluid that will help or assist with the movement of the animal. Why? Because that pressure of the fluid and the contracting of the muscles, that gives the animal its shape and then causes it to move forward. If the body is segmented, and this is really special, if it is segmented, then the pressure in the fluid is localized to only a few segments at a time. What you can do is, I've put a diagram in here of an earthworm, but go and, I know that you are now teenagers and that gardening isn't exactly sort of one of the things that you do as a happy pastime, but do yourselves a favor. Go and take a fork or a spoon or a small spade or something and go and dig in any kind of soft soil, especially after it's rained. And you will find earthworms galore. Have a look at the earthworm. Take the earthworm, rinse it off in water so it's not all grainy and gritty. Especially you ladies, don't think of it as it actually is the most amazing thing to watch. Put the earthworm on a piece of paper and watch it move. And it scrunches part of its body up and another part of its body goes long. Now you must remember, when it goes scrunchy like that, the segments, those muscles are contracting. And while the muscles where the body is long, they have to be relaxing. So you've got the circular muscles are relaxing, and then the circular muscles contract. And that's what causes this worm to be able to move forward. It's actually incredible to watch. Okay, a hydrostatic skeleton, you have to know the advantages and the disadvantages. Now the advantages, just think about them. Number one, It's not rigid, so it can fit in anywhere. It can squeeze into small little places. It allows the animal to move in a more flexible manner. It's very flexible. I mean, if you take your internal skeleton arm and I try and bend my arm, the bone doesn't bend. So it's not very flexible. If we are flexible as people, we are flexible because our muscles can stretch, or we double jointed or something. But here, this little animal with its hydrostatic skeleton, it's not rigid, so therefore it is able to be flexible. The fluid cavity stimulates circulation because, remember, as this fluid is being squished backwards and forwards, it's increasing circulation of the other structures and substances around the body. So those are the advantages. The disadvantages would be dehydration. Now, if it's the liquid that, or the fluid that gives this animal its skeleton, if it dehydrates, hello, there is no liquid. So if there is no liquid, it's going to immediately affect the ability of the animal to move. Why? It's going to lose shape if it dehydrates. Also, it doesn't provide any protection to the internal organs. So no protection is provided, whereas with an exoskeleton and an endoskeleton, there is a lot of protection for internal organs. Here, not at all. Alrighty, now we go on to an exoskeleton. Exo means outside. And you have gone through a lot of years of schooling. You will know that that hard outer shell, an example of that would be insects. The skeleton is made of a substance called chitin. Okay, you can pronounce it chitin if you like. Chitin doesn't matter as long as you know how to spell it. And that is secreted by the epidermis. All right, so the head and the thorax make up the exoskeleton. And the abdomen is soft and is attached to the thorax. So you'll have the head and the thorax, and then you have the abdomen. All right, remember, if it's an insect, it's going to have 3 pairs of legs. If it has 4, then it becomes an arachnoid, all right, or arachnida, which is spider. Okay, so here we've got my very funny little insect, but it's got its 3 pairs of legs and it's got its abdomen. And in cases where insects have wings, the wings will also be attached here to the thorax. Okay, the exoskeleton acts as a hard outer covering of the animals and is made up of a series of plates or tubes. Very, very important. Now, if we look at the exoskeleton, here we've got, I chose a dragonfly. Dragonflies are absolutely gorgeous. Apart from the fact that they are so colorful, here is a perfect example of where the wings are. And then you've got this abdomen over there. So it's the head, the thorax, and then the abdomen. 3 pairs of legs and the wings. And dragonflies, by the way, are supposed to be good luck. There are a whole bunch of different groups of people that believe a dragonfly is good luck. All right, exoskeleton advantages. Okay, now think about it, people. It forms a point of attachment of the internal muscles needed for locomotion and flight. So it's the point of attachment for the internal muscles for locomotion and for flying. Okay, so if it was an ant, it would be just locomotion. In the case of the dragonfly, locomotion and flight. It supports and protects the delicate inner parts of the animal. It prevents desiccation. There's no drying out for the animals that live on land. It has a low density. Now, this is very important. And that is why it is lightweight. Because imagine if it had a high density, that insect wouldn't be able to take off. Its body would be too heavy. All right, the disadvantages, however, are the final body side is limited. It can't just carry on growing and growing and growing, okay? Because the body size, every time it increases, the surface area to volume ratio is going to decrease. And this is something you have to know. Growth is restricted. So periodic molding is required, molting is required. So it's molting. Now, you will have seen, okay, in insects, if you're very lucky, you will find if you go hunting around, you will see exoskeletons for locusts. Or if you keep locusts in your classroom in a sort of a terrarium, you'll be able to see the skins as this little nymph grows. And every time it grows in size, it literally bursts out of its skin, so it molts that skin, and then a new exoskeleton forms. But while this new exoskeleton is forming, okay, and it's now molted, everything is wet and soft. So it is very vulnerable. It cannot move while it is molting. So it is very vulnerable when it molts. And you'll find that insects don't molt 50,000 times. In their life cycle, your different types of insects will molt 5, 6, maybe 7 times, and that's it. So it grows to a point and it molts, and it grows to a point and it molts. But while molting, it can get caught by anything because it can't move. Everything is all soft and mush. Okay, endoskeleton. Now we start talking about something that we have, so it's easy to remember. This skeleton is found inside the body, not on the outside, it's on the inside, and it consists of bone and it consists of cartilage. Okay, sharks, for example, have an endoskeleton that's only made of cartilage, whereas vertebrates are animals, and we have bone. Advantages: endoskeletons consist of living tissue, so it is able to grow steadily within the animal. Okay, that's firstly. Secondly, the skeleton is jointed, and that allows it to move around and to be able to support things. So it allows for movement and support. But the fact that it is jointed is very important. So it carries on growing steadily and fixing and replacing cells, and it is jointed. The muscles attach directly to the skeletal bones. Now that's nice, because you've got the skeleton forms this inner framework, this sort of core framework, and then the muscles attach to the skeleton to cause it to move. Okay, also for movement and support. Vital organs are protected by the bone cavities. People, what have we got in here? We've got a brain. And the brain is soft and mushy, so you've got this hard skull around the outside to protect it. We've got our rib cage. What's inside here? The heart, the lungs, the liver, they're all in this area here, nicely protected by the rib cage. Your pelvic area, what does that protect? It protects the reproductive organs and also your digestive organs. Okay, disadvantage: lack of mineral elements like calcium and phosphates will cause brittle bones, and that affects movement and support. We all know about osteoporosis, okay? Generally in women and not men, or let's say for every 10 cases in women, you'll have 1 or 2 cases in men. Why? Because our bodies are not designed to store calcium. We release calcium very quickly, whereas men will store. That's why the male's bones, or bones in a male, are generally heavier than the bones in a female. But osteoporosis is the lack of being able to store calcium. So either the person doesn't take in enough calcium and they then end up with a deficiency, which can cause osteoporosis. The bones become porous and they break and snap, etc. But we're going to do more of that just now. All right, here's an endoskeleton, and I thought this was quite cute. This is the endoskeleton of a swordfish, and it's a bony fish. You can clearly see it's got lots of bones, but look at this lovely sword in the front here. But that's all created by bone. So there's an endoskeleton of a swordfish. Then, while I was looking for pictures, I thought this would be quite cool, is to show you there is a snake, there's another kind of snake, here is sort of a turtle, here is another kind of turtle, it could also be a tortoise, I'm not quite sure. This one's probably definitely a turtle because it's got the long tail. So here you've got your reptiles and their bony skeletons. Then we have the endoskeleton here of a starfish, something else that's supposed to bring luck. So maybe what I'm trying to do here is give all of you a little bit of luck for your studies in grade 11. All right, so there you've got your starfish, but they're all in endoskeletons. And then here, There we have sharky. And this shark here, swimming around, its entire endoskeleton is made up of cartilage and not bone. Remember that. Now we go on to the human skeleton. And we say, humans, what do we have? We have internal skeletons. And those internal skeletons are made up of three things: bones, cartilage, and connective tissue. Okay, before we even look at the functions of a skeleton here, think. Close your eyes and think. What are the functions of our skeleton? Okay, first of all, it keeps us upright. Okay, it keeps us upright and it gives our body shape. Girls that have big hips or hip bones will have big curvy hips. All right, some people are big boned and they will have a much bigger frame. So it gives our body shape and structure. What else does it do? What do we have inside here? We have internal organs, so it protects those internal organs, okay? It allows us to move. We have joints, all right? And those joints and muscles allow us to walk. It allows us to move and do whatever it is that we want to do, but we have movement. And if you've ever watched dancers just prancing around, or anywhere where people dancing, look at the way some people can move their bodies. Other people can't. Look at sport. Our rugby players, our soccer players, basketball players, netball players, hockey players, swimmers, we are able to move, and that's what makes it so amazing. We have jointed skeletons. Now, look here. First of all, it provides shape and support. Easy one to remember. Number two, protection of the vital organs. Okay, and then I've put examples here of the brain and the rib cage and the lungs and the pelvis and the pelvic bones protecting the digestive tract and the reproductive organs. It allows the body to move. Why? Because muscles are attached to the bone, and it gives us leverage. So the more leverage we have, the better we can move. Here's one I didn't bring your attention to, was in our long bones. That contains red bone marrow. Now, you will have studied in grade 10 about red blood cells and white blood cells, and where are they produced? They're produced in the long bone. So you've got the femur, which runs from your hip to your knee. You've got your humerus, another long bone. These are long bones. They're just one big long bone. And in there, we are going to produce, we have red bone marrow, and what that red bone marrow does is it produces the blood cells. Okay? Bones store minerals such as calcium and phosphate ions. And because if there's a lack of calcium and phosphate ions, we end up with osteoporosis. We must be able to store it. And bones in the middle ear are called the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And what do? They amplify sound. They're the three little ossicles. And you need to know this for next year when you are going to learn about the ear and the sound, or the path of sound, why we are able to hear. Those three little ossicles are the tiniest little bones in the body. And when you listen to very, very loud music, those little bones become damaged and you end up going deaf. All right, or hard of hearing at any rate. Now, people, we have this entire skeleton, and the skeleton is divided into types of bones. Now, we've got the long bone, and the long bones have a central shaft. They have two heads, one on each end. So you'll have this long central shaft, and you have a sort of a... Okay, there's a very basic diagram of what a long bone is, and an example would be the femur. The femur, as I said, runs from your hip to your knee. That's your long bone, and it's in there that your red and your white blood cells are produced. Okay, so the long bone, not difficult to figure out where the long bone is. Then we have flat bones. And what do flat bones do? They're made up of compact bone covered by a layer of spongy bone on the inside, and the example would be the shoulder blades. But think about it, where else would we find a flat bone? It would be in the pelvic area. So these big bones that we have here, they're flat. They are your flat bone shoulder blades at the back of your back and your hip bones. And then we have irregular bones. Now, I mean, really, irregular bones, all you have to do is think of someone and think of the spine. Think of the spinal cord, run your finger down your back, and you can feel that it's sort of like strange. It's got this ribbly thing down the side. Those would be an example of your vertebra of the spine. Also the small bones in the hands and the feet. These little bones here, they're all little irregular bones. All right, so 3 types of bones. Okay, we have the long bones, the flat bones, your scapula, okay, or your pelvis, your pelvic bones, okay, and then the irregular bones. Spinal cord is probably the nicest, safest ones. Your vertebra, they don't look very good. They're very strange, okay, very strange, irregular shape. All right, people, you must know the diagram of a long bone. This is very, very, very important. Nota bene, it is very important. You must learn this. You will get it in some form in an exam. Okay, so what do we have here? There's the long bone. You have the head on one end, the head on the other end, and the compact shaft in the middle. All right, so what are we looking at? We're looking at the epiphysis and the epiphysis. Epiphysis and the epiphysis is the 2 ends of the bone. Okay, so your 2 ends. Number 1. Number 2, it's got a very thin layer of compact bone, and then you've got the spongy bone on the inside, and that's where your bone marrow sits here. You also have going from the outside inwards, you are going to have compact bone, and then the next layer is the periosteum, the periosteum, which has got the blood vessels, and then the next layer you're going to get through is going to be this thin layer of compact bone on the inside, and then the yellow bone marrow cavity. So the yellow bone marrow sitting right in the middle over there. So red marrow over here, and the yellow marrow is on the inside. If you've ever had a lamb roast or a sheep roast, okay, that's normally this thigh area here, and you can very often, the way it is cut, you will have this part of this hip bone, but you'll also have a bit of the femur, which is the leg of the lamb, which is what we are talking about, the cut of meat. And if you cook that leg of lamb and you then cut all the meat off it, you have these 2 pieces of bone that are perfect. People, have a look, get your mom to go and make a roast leg of lamb for lunch on Sunday, so that you can have a look at those bones. Alternatively, a chicken. Go and have a chicken, and you have a look at where it is the thigh and where the femur comes in and joins with the thigh bone. Have a look at how difficult it is to open it up there. And at the same time, you're going to be having a nice meal. So what we have the epiphysis, which is also, you can just say, is the head of it, and then you have the shaft, is this middle part here. The diaphysis is the shaft. Your layers, you're going to have compact bone, then you have the periosteum, that carries the blood vessels and the nerves, because if you break a bone, it's painful. So that's where it's because of the nerves. And then on the inside, you're going to have your yellow bone marrow cavity, and the red bone marrow cavity is at each of the head areas. All right, and that's where we have our red blood cells and our white blood cells are formed. Just remember that the head portion is spongy bone. Okay, so you can have spongy bone in the epiphysis, both sides, and the diaphysis, the shaft, is where you have a lot of compact bone. Make sure you know this diagram. Okay, then, if we're looking at the types of bones, continues. The smallest bones in the body are found in the ear. Remember, it's the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. They are the ossicles because they oscillate and they amplify sound. Okay? Now, the sound wave vibration is then passed through the membrane to the inner ear, and there, clearly the cochlea is going to convert the sound into an impulse. Now, what is an impulse? You haven't done this yet. An impulse is the language of the brain. All right, so everything that you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is converted into an impulse by receptors. So your taste buds would be receptors. What you are seeing now is perceived by the retina and the rod and cone cells in the retina. And all of it, those receptors convert the stimulus into an impulse, and the impulse is then sent to the brain. And the brain says, that tastes good. It doesn't taste good. It tastes salty, sweet. I can hear a big noise. I can hear nice music. All of that is converted into an impulse by receptors and then sent to the brain to interpret. All right, the impulse is then interpreted as sound, and we then know what's going on. So here, this is the cranial bone. So this is almost a hollowed out piece that is inside the skull. All right, then we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which are the proper Latin names, but this is also called the hammer and the anvil and the stirrup. Okay, so, and this looks like a stirrup. So the fact that it looks like a stirrup is the reason it's called a stirrup. So hammer, anvil, and stirrup. The three little ossicles. People, we look at the tissue of the skeleton now. What tissue are we going to have? There are always going to be bone, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments. That's the tissue. So, and actually your tendons and your ligaments are made up of a certain type of cartilage. All right, so you have your bone, your cartilage, your ligaments, and tendons. Those are the four structures that are going to make sure that this skeleton gives us support and we are able to move. So we take, first of all, we take our bone tissue, and bone cells are called osteocytes. That's where we get the word osteoporosis from, because the osteocytes in their little cavity, the little osteocyte has now died. Okay, it isn't there anymore. And that's what makes the bone spongy. All right, so osteocytes are bone cells. And they live in the cavities called lacuna. So the lacuna is like its little room. So if an osteocyte was you would go to your bedroom, that would be the lacunae. It's where it stays. Layers called lamellae. Now remember, lamellae are just, it's another word for layers. It's a Latin word for layers, which we use in life sciences, form around the osteocytes. Between the lamellae are tiny little canals. Now, they're little canals, so therefore they are called caniculi. So they are, see, canals, canal, there's the word canal, iculi. So they're little canals, they're baby canals. And they link those osteocytes so they can talk to each other. In the center of the bone tissue is the Havesian canal. All right? And the Havesian canal is where you're going to find the artery and a vein and a nerve. And that is why when the bone tissue is damaged in any way, it hurts. All right, it hurts like a demon. Why? Because you've got nerve cells flowing throughout the bone. So we've got, let's just recap. We've got the bone cells, and the bone cells are called osteocytes. They are found in a little cavity called a lacuna. All right, those lacuna have little lamella or layers around them, and we have little canals so that there's some form of communication between the caniculi. So when I say they talk to each other, they don't really talk to each other, but it's a way for you to remember it. The caniculi are little communication channels between one osteocyte and another osteocyte. Okay, and then the Havesian canal. People, you must know the Havesian canal is found right in the center of bone tissue. Okay, or groups of bone tissue, and it contains an artery to take oxygenated blood, a vein to take away the carbon dioxide blood, and a nerve to feel pain. Okay, now remember, bone is rigid, it's strong, it's hard, and it's all made of connective tissue. It's a form of connective tissue, and it has a supporting structure. Okay, it forms the endoskeleton of mammals. I mean, we know this already. There are two types of bones. We get spongy bone and we get compact bone. Now, clearly, spongy bone will be softer and compact bone is going to be hard. And when we looked at the diagram of the long bone, we had compact bone in the middle where the shaft was and spongy bone at the epiphysis, which is the ends of the long bone. Here's tissue of a skeleton, of the skeleton. This is the bone tissue. So again, I like this picture very much. We have this part of the long bone. Here we have the spongy bone and we have the yellow bone marrow, and there's your compact bone around the outside. Now, what they've done is they've taken here, they've increased that, and they've made it larger over here. So if we look here, we've got this spongy marrow cavity, okay, or spongy bone cavity, and here we're going to have our Havasian canal. There's one Havasian canal. So we look here, in the center of the bone tissue, there is your Havasian canal, all right? Because remember, we're looking at that one, we've peeled the layers away, so we've got layers of bone tissue, and each one of these little darker areas here, that is the osteocyte there, and it's got the layers, the lamella around them. It's got the lacuna, which is the little room or cavity in which it is. And then we have the caniculi, which make the pathways. You'll be able to see them here. Let me, I'm going to do them in green. You'll see they link to each other so that they are able to communicate and pass on nutrients, etc., between each other. It's like a little spider web. But here we've got our caniculi between these two osteocytes. So the cavity is the lacuna, and the osteocytes sits inside the cavity, and the lamella are the layers, and the caniculi are its sort of little passages, little communication channels. All right. Moving on, here we take what we saw in color and we're going to make it black and white. And this would be what you would draw in an exam, except just, I'm sure you'd draw it a little neater. This is more an artistic version of it. But you've got the lacuna, which is the cavity, which contains the osteocytes, the caniculi, which are all these little things that look like little hairs all around here, and they're the caniculi, and then we have the Havasian canal in the middle, and the Havasian canal's job to carry a nerve, an artery, and a vein. All right, tissue, we're looking at the function, the tissue, bone tissue functions. Now, what does bone tissue do? Bone supports and protects the internal organs. It serves an attachment for the muscles. Your bone marrow produces the red blood cells and your white blood cells, and your bone cells store mineral elements. Now you will notice that the function of the bone tissue is very similar to the function of the skeleton. Why? Because the skeleton is composed of bone tissue. Except that here, if it was the skeleton, we'd say it protects the internal, soft internal organs, whereas bone tissue here, we're not going to say that. We're going to talk about the fact that it supports more than anything else. Okay, tissues of the skeleton continued. We've looked at the bone tissue. Now we look at cartilage. What does cartilage do? It contains now not osteocytes like we had in the bone tissue. We now have chondrocytes. And the chondrocytes live in little spaces, also called the lacuna. The same as with the osteocytes. The chondrocytes produce strong, flexible, see-through matrix. Now, people, take the tip of your ear here and bend it. Does it bend easily? Yes, it does. Now take your bone here and try and bend your bones here. No, it doesn't. So bone tissue is not flexible. It's strong and it's hard, okay? And it's there to support. Whereas your cartilage, those chondrocytes and the material and matrix around the chondrocytes makes it more flexible. So it's strong, but it's flexible. Okay? Now, we look at hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage, for example, at the end of our nose. Also here, run your fingers up and down your throat, and you'll be able to feel these little circles all the way down your throat over here. Those little C-shaped cartilage rings, those are made of hyaline cartilage as well, and they're around the trachea to keep the trachea open. We've also got the connections of the ribs to the sternum. So here, if you feel where your breastplate is here, okay, this is your sternum. So attaching from the ribs to the sternum, there we're going to have hyaline cartilage. And of course, the ends of bones in the joints. For example, it forms articular cartilage. Articular cartilage is cartilage where you're going to have one surface rubbing against another one. It articulates. All right, so that's your hyaline cartilage. Functions of cartilage: it reduces friction in the bone joints, like with the articular cartilage. It attaches bones to other bones, for example, the ribs, and it keeps the trachea open so that we can breathe. All right. Now here's tissue of the skeleton continued. This would be what cartilage looks like. You have your chondrocytes, and they sit inside the lacuna. So this little area around here where the chondrocyte is, that is the lacuna. It's like the little cavity. And then you have this matrix in between. All right, people, now we look at, we've done bone tissue, we've done cartilage, now we look at tendons. Tendons are a specific kind of cartilage. It's actually called white fibrous cartilage, not hyaline cartilage, white fibrous. And here we're going to have our collagen fibers are there to make it strong and also slightly flexible. So all tendons consist of white fibrous cartilage, okay? And where do we find it? We find it in the discs between the vertebrae, all right? We find it in the ball and socket joints, and also in the hips and the shoulder, ball and sockets in the hip and shoulders. Functions of tendons. This is the most important thing here, and you must know this very well. Tendons connect muscle to bone, okay? Think of your Achilles tendon. It's probably the most common tendon. Achilles tendon is in your heel, and it connects the bones of the heel to your calf muscle, okay? And also white fibrous cartilage acts as a shock absorber when it's in the spine, and also in the deeper joints to prevent the bones from dislocating. Okay, now we look at ligaments, and that's yellow elastic cartilage. So hyaline cartilage, think of the nose and the trachea. Okay, then if we look at white fibrous cartilage, those are your tendons. Now your ligaments are yellow elastic cartilage. This cartilage has collagen fibers, but it also has yellow elastic fibers. And this makes it strong, it makes it flexible, and it is tightly packed, so it doesn't just break. Okay, the yellow elastic cartilage is found in all ligaments, in the pinna of the ear, and also the epiglottis. The epiglottis is the little structure that closes the hole so that it's your lungs, so to the trachea, because remember, you've got a portion of your throat where what you're breathing and what you're eating is shared. Okay, then the trachea goes off and the esophagus goes into the stomach. Now the epiglottis is the flap that closes the air pipe or closes the entrance to the trachea. It has to be good and strong. Functions of ligaments: they attach bone to bone. That is your most important function of ligaments, is they attach bone to bone. So they're going to prevent the bone from just falling out of place. I mean, can you imagine that if all the joints in your finger weren't held, all these bones weren't held together and they were all just sort of dangly, you wouldn't be able to hold anything, you wouldn't be able to control it. Okay, now we go to our questions. And it says, name 3 types of skeletons and provide one advantage and one disadvantage of each. Now, you'll notice here, it says name 3 types. In other words, it doesn't say tabulate. But what are we doing? We're going to be looking at 3 types of skeletons and 1 advantage and 1 disadvantage of each. So it stands to reason, people, the easiest way to do this so that you do not get confused, even though they haven't asked you to tabulate, is to tabulate. Because then you don't get confused. So what you do is you do something like this. And you'll say, right, this is the skeleton. So the first one we're going to start, this is the, hang on, let's just write advantage and disadvantage. Okay, so first one we'll do hydrostatic. Okay, because you've got to name the skeletons. And advantages of your hydrostatic skeleton would be they are not rigid, they are flexible, okay, and they also aid circulation. So any one of those 3 you could have written as an advantage of a hydrostatic skeleton. I'm just going to put here not rigid and flexible structure. Okay, and clearly it aids or stimulates circulation. A disadvantage, dehydration. If there's dehydration, there's a loss of shape. Okay, and also it doesn't protect the internal organs. Now I'm not going to write everything out. I'm trying to show you how you would actually answer this question. Always, whenever you ask to compare things or to name or state things where there is a comparison of sorts, use a table. Number 1, it's easy for the marker, whoever's assessing your work, to mark it. Okay. Number 2, more importantly, it helps you to keep track of what it is that you're answering. Because in some cases, learners may only write the 3 types of endoskeletons. And then they write an advantage and a disadvantage, and nobody knows where that advantage or disadvantage fits in. So this helps you keep track of your body and your brain and where everything is working. Our next type of skeleton would be an exoskeleton. Now with an exoskeleton, remember it is a point of, it's the head and the thorax. So it's a point of attachment for the legs and the wings. What else was there? It supports the delicate and protects the delicate internal organs. There is no dehydration, so it prevents desiccation or drying out. Why? Because it's hard on the outside. Nothing, no liquid can be lost. Okay, and a disadvantage is the molting. When this animal grows, or insect, as it grows, it has to now shed skin, and when it sheds that skin, it is all soft and vulnerable. Okay, exoskeleton, and then we look at the endoskeleton. Okay, and an endoskeleton, well, it's made of living tissue. It protects the internal organs. It is able to move because of joints, so it's very flexible. So those are all advantages, and there are lots. You can go through what we've done so far. Disadvantage of an endoskeleton would be that if there's a lack of minerals like calcium and phosphate ions, we are going to have a problem, okay, because the bones will then become porous. So you could choose anything you wanted to write there, people, but remember, you've got the advantage and a disadvantage, and they only ask for 1. And each of these would have been a mark, and that would have given you your 9 marks. State where the Havesian canal is located and state its function well. The Havesian canal is right in the center of bone tissue. Okay, so the Havesian canal is located in the center of bone tissue. Okay, and what is its function? Now, its function would be to transport oxygen to the bone, okay, to transport carbon dioxide away from bone. And instead of bone, you could also write the osteocytes, so bone tissue, osteocytes, okay, and nerve tissue is in the canal for perception of nerve stimuli. And I've run out of space here, but nerve stimuli. So all you would have had to do there is talk about the fact that it contains an artery, a vein, and a nerve. All right, the artery to carry oxygenated blood, artery to carry nutrients, vein to carry deoxygenated blood, vein to transport waste products away from the blood tissue, bone tissue, osteocytes. It's the osteocytes. They're living cells. They need oxygen, they need nutrients, they need carbon dioxide to be removed, they need wastes to be removed. They need calcium, they need phosphate ions, or those osteocytes cannot make new layers of bone tissue. All right, then name 4 functions of bone tissue. Now, if we look at the functions of bone tissue, what does it do? Okay, let's write it. It is for support and protection. Okay. Support and protection and movement, but support and protection of internal organs. Okay, what else is it? Point of attachment. For muscles. Muscles. Okay. You've got the bone marrow in long bones, provides blood, and that would be your red and white blood cells. Okay, and I've now run out of space here. 4 functions. We'd say I think the easiest one to write here would be stores, mineral salts. Mineral salts like calcium and phosphate ions. Okay, so support and protection of the internal organs, point of attachment of muscles, bone marrow in the long bones provides the blood, so we have red and white blood cells, and it also stores minerals like, for example, vitamins and, calcium and phosphate ions. Now, they actually ask you here, tabulate 2 differences between tendons and ligaments. Now, whenever you see a question that says tabulate, it will always have a +1 mark. So you'll tabulate 2 differences, which will give you your 4 marks, and then your +1, which is for the actual writing of the table. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, now, just for drawing this, you get an extra mark. I mean, really, people, it's the easiest mark you'll ever get. Look there. So here we say tendon, and here we say ligament. Because that's what they want, differences between tendons and ligaments. So the tendon, first of all, it connects or joins muscle to bone. Now, what do ligaments do? They join bone to bone. Tendons are made of white fibrous cartilage. Okay, and ligaments are made up of yellow, elastic cartilage. Okay, I'm trying to think of a third one. Tendons would be for movement and balance. Movement and balance. And if we look at ligaments, they are going to, they will hold bones in place, especially at joints. Okay, so think of a ligament as a sort of an attachment between a bone and a bone. So if I look at this this joint here, I'm going to have a bone there and a bone there. So between the two, I'm going to have ligaments. But I'm also going to have tendons which attach the muscle to the bones, and that's why I can move this finger up and down. So people, they asked for 2 differences. I've given you 3 differences here. You can choose any one, but your most important is that tendons join muscles to bone and ligaments join bone to bone. This is white fibrous cartilage, that's yellow elastic cartilage, movement and balance, and that holds the bones in place. All right, now, here we get to the nitty-gritty of this whole process. We look at the skeleton. Now, the skeleton is made of approximately 206 bones. We have, and I'm going to just change my pen here to a different color. We have the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Now, what are these 2 things? Your axial skeleton, if something is the axis, it's the central point. So if we have an axial skeleton, it is the head and the spinal cord all the way down. So it's this part of your body is the axial skeleton. It's the head, the spinal cord, here, your clavicle, all this part. It's everything that makes up your trunk of your body, all right? Your appendicular skeleton, an appendix is something that's extra. If you look at a book, and they'll have an appendix at the back of the book, which will just be something extra. Now, literally, that is what your appendicular skeleton is. It's the extra skeleton. It's your arms, your upper limbs, and your legs, your lower limbs, that attach as the appendicular skeleton. So the axial skeleton is the main skeleton, and then you have the appendicular skeleton, which is the rest. Now, if you don't have arms and you don't have legs, you can still live happily and comfortably, and you are still alive, and you are still whatever it is, whatever animal you are. Okay, as long as you have others that can look after you so that you can survive. All right, we've heard of people that have lost their arms and are able to paint and draw with their feet. Okay, so we don't need the appendicular skeleton to be alive. It helps us to move, but it doesn't keep us alive. So that's the way you need to remember it. Axial skeleton is, and here we have it, the skull and the vertebral column. And part of that vertebral column, you're going to have your ribs and your sternum. Okay, that makes the axial skeleton. Your appendicular skeleton, this portion here, so your appendicular skeleton is the girdle, pectoral girdle, and the pelvic girdle. Now, if you have ladies, if you've ever listened to the young gentlemen out there talking about their bodies, and especially if they're into bodybuilding, they talk about their pecs. Okay, you got to do the pecs. And the pecs means to get this part of the body all big and strong. So the pectoral girdle is the arms, and the pelvic girdle, you're looking at the legs, because it attaches to the pelvis, and we all know this is the pelvis. So pelvic girdle is to the pelvis, the pectoral girdle, arms, is to the pecs, to this part of the body. Okay, arms. And then clearly the upper limbs and the lower limbs. So the axial skeleton is made up of 3 parts. You've got the skeleton and the vertebral column and the ribs and the sternum. The appendicular skeleton only has 2 parts. It's got the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle. Pectoral girdle are your arms. Pelvic girdle is the lower limb. Now we look at our little skeleton. And people, you must know all of these labels. Okay? Let's go pink. All right. First of all, the skull. The skull has eye sockets, and you have the lower jaw. Then you have your vertebra. Now there are 33 vertebrae in the body, and there are 7 neck vertebrae. And you need to know that. Now, those neck vertebrae can get injured when, for example, you know, when you have a car accident or bumper bashing and there's whiplash. It's the cervical vertebrae that get damaged. All right. Then clearly your collarbone. Now, we all know this as a collarbone. It's called the clavicle. but we know the common name is the collarbone. I'm going to shade it because this diagram is a little small and I want you to be able to see it. So what I've made in pink there, the clavicle, your collarbones. And it's always very nice when a girl stands up straight and she has really good posture, you can see her collarbones. All right, now there's the long bone, the humerus, and there's the femur. So you have the head of the humerus. Humerus fits into this thing here, which is called the clavicle. The scapula. And the scapula is the shoulder blade. Remember, the shoulder blade is a flat bone. Okay? Then we have the rib cage. And in the middle of the rib cage is the sternum. Now, even if you don't do life sciences, learners out there will know that this bone in the middle here is called the sternum. So even if you don't do life sciences, now if they know it, then surely you should know it even better, okay, because you are life science learners. So this is the sternum right in the middle here. And then clearly your ribs. And right now, with the ribs and the rib cage, you must remember that there are 7 pairs of ribs that attach to the sternum. And then we have 5 pairs of ribs that don't, and they are then called the floating ribs because they don't attach to the front of the sternum. They basically sit here and they actually protect our kidneys. All right, but they sit only at the back here. They don't come all the way and join into the sternum. Otherwise, our sternum would be to our belly buttons, and it isn't. Okay, if we look at the arm, we have the humerus, and then we have the radius and the ulna. How do we tell the difference? You see your thumb, and your thumb can rotate. So the radius is always on the thumb side, and the ulna is always your fingers. All right, so radius always joins with your rotating thumb, and that's how you remember it. Then we have the pelvis. So you've got your radius and your ulna, you've got the elbow joint, and now the fingers. Let's finish the fingers. We're going to have the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. Your phalanges are your fingers, okay? Your metacarpals are these bones here that you can see. If you move your hand like this, you can see those bones, and then you have your carpals. So everything to do with your hands is carpals and metacarpals and phalanges. Okay, now we get to the structure here. We have the sacrum, and the sacrum is the solid part of your spinal cord. It's the one that's at the back here, and it's hard. Okay, it sort of forms your bottom area. So there's the sacrum, and it's solid and it's hard and fused. And then it goes sort of into the coccyx, which is what's sort of right at the end of our tail. Then here, the pelvis. Attached to the pelvis, you have the femur, which is the longest bone in the body. And the femur attaches to 2 bones here. You have got the tibia and the fibula. Now the tibia is always on the inside, but the best way to remember it is the tibia is always in line with your big toe, and the fibula is on the outside. So it's the tibia that actually makes your shin bone. All right, that big flat bone is your tibia, and it's in line with your big toe. And T for tibia and big toe. Then you have your heel bones. Those are called tarsals. Now remember, we have carpals in the hand and tarsals in the feet. So just think in where do you have toes? You don't have toes here. These are fingers. You have toes on your feet. So your tarsals belong to the feet. So the tarsal bones are your ankle bones. Then you have your metatarsals, which are the long bones that you can see. If you wiggle your toes, you'll see things moving. Those are your bones, your metatarsals. And then the phalanges are the same as your fingers, are your toe joints as well. So people, that is the entire skeleton. You must make sure you know your skeleton, but we're going to do each part on its own individually now. All right, people, we're going to look now at the axial skeleton. Remember, this is the skull and the spinal cord and the rib cage. So, the skull. The skull is made up of many bony plates. Okay, the joints, and this is important, the joints between the bones of the skull are called the sutures. Okay, sutures. And when you'll notice when a baby is born, it's got that soft patch here in the middle of its head. That soft patch is called the fontanelle. And what happens is as that baby is born, the bones do this. And the baby comes out so that it can fit through the birth canal, and then it does that. And that's why it has that soft spot. And that soft spot is there till they're about 1.5 years, 2 years old, or until the bones have actually closed. And where they close is the sutures. The main function of the cranium, okay, is to protect the brain and the internal ears. Now you've got to understand that this whole thing is a skull. Okay. The skull is made up of the cranium, which is this bone all around your head here. Then you've got your facial bones, all right? You have your upper jaw, which is part of your facial bones, and then you have your lower jaw. So when we talk about the cranium, we talk about the solid bone area, and the skull is everything. The sockets in the cranium are the orbits for the eyeballs, okay? And it's also the point of attachment. Now, if you have a skeleton at school, go and have a look at it and you'll see where the orbit is for the eyeball, there's a hole in the back. And that hole in the back is where the optic nerve will leave the eyeball to go to the brain. Okay, and then the jaw bones have cavities, clearly, where we have our teeth. Right. Okay. Okay, people, now we look here and we have the spinal cord. Now you know why they say that the bones of the vertebra, which make up the spinal cord, are irregular bones. They are irregular bones. I mean, look at them. They don't have a nice set shape. They're all mixed up and pointy and funny and have these ugly little things that stick out from them. And if you run your finger along here, what does it feel like? It's got a ridge. So you've got the first bone, and this you must know. The first bone onto which the skull will fit is called the atlas. And just remember that in the very, very old days, in Greek mythology, you had this very, very strong guy. He was like a god, and he carried the earth on his shoulder. All right, and his name was Atlas. So Atlas carried the world on his shoulder. Well, clearly here we've got the skull, and on the skull we're going to have Atlas, Atlas being the very first vertebra. The very next one is the axis, and the axis can actually move very nicely. So the first two cervical vertebrae, these are your neck vertebra. The first two are the atlas and then the axis. You must know that, please. Okay? In between each of these vertebrae, we are going to have cartilage. And what the cartilage does is it acts as a shock absorber. I mean, can you imagine if we had bone on bone and on our spine? Every single time you took a step to walk, you would be pounding away at those poor bones. So what do we have? We have cartilage. The next set of vertebrae we have are our thoracic vertebrae. Okay, now think if we were insects, we would have our head, and this would be our thorax. So thoracic vertebra is our rib cage, makes our rib cage. This is our thorax. All right, thoracic vertebra, and this is where our ribs fit on. Our ribs attach here. Then we have the lumbar vertebra. And you people, when they have a lumbar punch, is in here, in the lumbar part of the spine. The gaps between the vertebrae are slightly bigger, so they are able to stick those big fat needles in there to suck out the cerebral fluid. All right, so this is the lumbar area. Also people with lower back, so that's the lower back. So if you get lower backache, it's because of the lumbar vertebra. Then we have the sacral vertebra. That's the solid part that forms your posterior. Okay, that's your bottom. And then right at the end, we have, just hold something else, your sacral vertebrae are fused, by the way. They're 5 fused vertebrae. They are fused. So they're solid, so they're quite hard, and they're very protective. Because remember, on the other side of your sacrum, first of all, you've got your pelvis that attaches to it. And what have you got on the other side? You've got all of the soft tissue here, which is your reproductive system. Okay, and then the caudal vertebra, which is our coccyx. Okay, and there are only 4 little vertebrae sitting on the bottom of our caudal vertebra, and that is our little coccyx. Okay, this is everything I've shown you on the diagram, except for I didn't say that there were 33 individual vertebrae. All right, the discs that move, those discs are made up of cartilage. They also act as they act as shock absorbers, but they're made of cartilage. The spinal cord runs through the center. So if we look here, from the brain all the way up here, you're going to find the vertebral column running all the way through here like that. So what is the main function of the spinal cord? It's and to protect at least the spinal cord, because the spinal cord is taking information from everywhere in the body. It goes to the spinal cord and then up the spinal cord to the brain. So we can't have any breaks in that cord. Okay, and then the first vertebra, the atlas, and the second one is the axis. So atlas, axis. You've got the cervical vertebra, then you have the thoracic vertebra for your thorax, then the lumbar vertebra for your lumbar, your lower back. All right, sacrum is solid, and then you have your coccyx at the end. Okay, rib cage. You've clearly got your spinal column all the way down the back. This rib cage is tilted slightly to the side. Now, you've got anything to do with your ribs is costal. So the muscles in between the ribs, intercostal muscles. So when you eat spare ribs, what are you eating? You're eating the intercostal muscles. They are between the costal bones. So inter means between. So you have your intercostal muscles will sit here between the costal bones like that. Okay, costal bones, the costal cartilage. Now, this little piece right in the front, if you take your finger and you stick it in here at the bottom of your sternum and you wiggle it around, it'll actually move. And that is made of cartilage. It's called your xiphoid process. Okay, so that's the xiphoid process, is this bottom end here, over there of the rib cage. Now, ribs. We have 7 pairs of true ribs. Why are they true? They are attached at the back and they are attached at the front to the sternum. Okay, and then we have our false ribs which float. Now those false ribs here, false ribs which are not, they're attached to the back, but they're not directly attached to the sternum. They're only attached to the sternum via a sort of a join onto the 7th vertebra. So they sort of hitch a ride on the 7th vertebra. And then we have our 2 ribs right at the end, which are floating ribs, and they are purely to keep and to protect the kidneys to a certain degree. So you've got these 5 pairs of ribs that are not true ribs, okay, divided into floating ribs and into false ribs. Your true ribs are attached at the back and at the front. Okay, rib cage, we've gone through all of this. It's got 12 pairs of ribs. The first 7 pairs are connected to the sternum. They're true ribs. The remaining 5 pairs are attached at the back but are free in the front, and we call them floating ribs. The rib is rigid structure, and it protects what's inside here, inside the cavity, the heart, the lungs, the liver. Also, your stomach sits in here. So but it's mainly your heart and your lungs that we need to protect. Your pancreas also sits in here. So all of that is protected by this rib cage. The muscles located between the ribs are called intercostal muscles. And now, people, when you inhale, your rib cage will lift up. When you exhale, your rib cage moves down. So when you inhale, your rib cage contracts so that it can lift the rib cage. Your muscles are going to contract to lift the rib cage. When you exhale, those muscles are going to relax and the air gets pushed out. That's why it's easier to breathe out than to breathe in. Can you imagine if you were sighing? People don't, when you're sighing and you're tired, you don't go, you go, why? Because breathing out is a relaxing movement. All right, and that's because of the ribs and the intercostal muscles. Now we look at the appendicular skeleton. It's an appendix. It's been added on, okay? And what do we have? We have our arms and we have our legs. So upper and lower limbs. Your upper limbs attached to the pectoral girdle. Pectoral girdle. Okay, so there's the pectoral girdle, there's the spinal cord clearly, and then you have your pectoral girdle, all these muscles that hold the shoulder blade in place. That's your shoulder blade clearly at the back, and then you have your clavicle, which is your collarbone, and you're looking at this picture from the back so that you can see this big fat shoulder blade. Okay, there's the shoulder joint. All right, the shoulder joint is between this shoulder blade, or the shoulder blade, and the humerus, which is the top bone here. Now, the way to remember that this is your humerus is because at your elbow here, if you bash your elbow, you say, "Ooh, I hit my funny bone." Now, there's nothing funny about hitting your funny bone, okay? But the way to remember it is that your funny bone is over here, which is actually where the nerves go through the curve here. So this is the humerus. The humerus, at the end of it, is your funny bone. So the humerus, or the shaft of the humerus, there's the shoulder joint, which we're going to go to in detail when we get to the second part 2. Then we have the elbow joint over here. Now remember, the radius is always on the side of the rotating thumb. And that's just the way I remember it, so I hope you will too. Your thumb can rotate, so the radius is always on the side of the thumb. And the ulna is always on the other side. Okay, so it's on the underside. And underside is the ulna. So the radius is on the top, facing your thumb. The ulna is on the underside. U for under, U for ulna. Then you have the carpals, or your wrist bones. And then you have the metacarpals of your hand. So carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. Your phalanges are your fingers. Okay, phalanges are also your toes. But phalanges, these are those little bones there that you can move around. Remember, the thumb has 2 and the fingers have 3 bones each, 3 phalanges. Okay, this is everything that we've done in our diagram, but let's recap quickly. The arms are attached to the pectoral girdle. The scapula, or the shoulder blades, and the clavicle, which is the collarbone, serves as points of attachment to the muscles. So it's here. You've got the muscles attached to your collarbone, your muscles attached to the scapula or the shoulder blade, and that's what keeps this part in place. And then you've got the humerus that attaches in here. Okay, and that controls the movement of the arm. All right, the upper arm bone is called the humerus. Okay, and it's a long bone. And it fits into here with a ball and socket joint. So you've got a ball and socket, hinge. Hinge joint is like the hinge of a door. It can only move in one direction. I can't bend my arm backwards. I can only bend it in one direction. So it's a hinge joint. Ball and socket can move it all the way around. Okay, the forearm consists of 2 bones, the radius and the ulna. Remember that the radius is always on the thumb side. The ulna is always on the other end. Carpals, the wrist, metacarpals in the hand, and then the fingers end up making the phalanges. And remember, this is not a finger, it's a thumb. Fingers, thumb, even though they are all phalanges. Alrighty, now we go on to is this the pectoral girdle? Come on. No, it is part of the pelvis, therefore it is the pelvic girdle. Okay, people? Pectoral girdle, pelvic girdle. Pectoral girdle where your pecs are, pelvic girdle where the pelvis is. Okay, you don't have to know all the different structures that make up the hip bone. You just have to know here that this forms the pelvis. There's your pelvis. Okay, in the front here, then your coccyx comes to the bottom. In the front there, where the two parts of the pelvis join, okay, that bone is called the pubic symphysis. And you must know it because we have a cartilaginous joint there. All right? Now, pelvis, and from the pelvis you have the head of the femur, and that's going to be made of spongy bone, remember? The head of the long bone always is spongy, so spongy bone. Then we have the femur, which is the shaft of the femur, and then we have the patella. Now, to the boys out there, the way you remember the femur is that females, which is the fairer sex, females have long femurs, which gives them beautiful, long, slim legs. So long, slim legs on a beautiful girl is because they have a long femur. Femur for female. I'm not saying that men don't, but it's a way to remember things, people. So femur is this long bone which gives girls their beautiful long legs. Okay, so the femur here, then we have the patella, which is the kneecap. So if you take your fingers and bend your knee and then feel that knobby thing that sits on the front. Now you can actually, if you relax, you can wiggle the kneecap a little bit. And quite often with soccer players and with rugby players, they end up with messed up knees. And it's that kneecap that very often needs to be replaced. So they replace it with sort of like a plastic substance. But if that kneecap wasn't there, imagine bending your knee, and you know how you have the funny bone here at your elbow? Now can you imagine having that kind of nerve exposed every time you bent your knee? You wouldn't be able to walk. So what we've got there is the kneecap to protect that hinge. So the kneecap or the patella, and here we have a hinge joint as well. Remember, a hinge joint can only go in one direction. And then the tibia and the fibula. How do we remember which one is which? The tibia is in line with the big toe. So if you remember that big T for toe and the big T for tibia. So the tibia is always on the side of the toe, and it's the big flat shin bone. These two, the common name is a shin bone. And the fibula is on the other side. It's the smaller bone. Okay. The calcaneum is the heel bone. Now remember, the heel is tarsals. The metatarsals is your foot. And then the toes are the phalanges. 14 phalanges, and we have 14 phalanges in the toes at least, and 14 phalanges in the fingers. And the way you're going to remember carpals versus tarsals, carpals are in your hand, tarsals are where the toes are. So the tibia is in line with the big toe, and the tarsals are to do with the toes of the body. And that's how you just remember it, people. Okay, going through the pelvic girdle, we almost finished. So just let's quickly recap here. The legs attach to the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle attaches to the sacrum. Okay, the femur, so the ball of the femur, attaches to the pelvic girdle as a ball and socket. The tibia and the fibula are the lower leg, okay, and they attach at the knee. The patella is the kneecap, okay, and it protects that joint. The ankle consists of tarsals. The foot consists of metatarsals, and then we have the phalanges, which make up the toes, okay. Pelvic girdle serves to protect the reproductive system, and the free movement of the hip makes it possible to run and walk and sit, and that's because of a ball and socket joint. Because remember, same ball and socket joint that you have here, you have onto your hip as well. Okay, last question. Supply the biological terms for each of these bones. So, what is your thigh bone? Is going to be, come on, you've got to know this. The thigh bone will be the femur. Okay? If we look here at the kneecap is the patella. The shin bone starts with a T. It's the tibia. The foot bones, same as the finger bones, they're going to be the phalanges. Okay? Then we have the heel bones. The heel bones are the, come on, make up the heel, the tarsals. The upper arm bone, humerus. The wrist bones. Now, if the heel bones are the tarsals, because that's where the toes are, the wrist bones are going to be the carpals. And the breastbone is the sternum. So make sure that you know the biological terms, people. Name 4 functions of the human skeleton. We've gone through this so many times now. What would the function of the skeleton be? Okay, it assists with movement. All right, so the skeleton as we have it helps us to move. Okay, why would we want to move? For food, etc. It also protects the internal organs. Okay, the human skeleton forms a point of attachment to the pelvic and the pectoral girdle so that we are able to move. Okay, any 4 functions of the human skeleton, there it is. Now, state the number of bones in the vertebral column. There are 33 bones. How many pairs of true ribs are there? True ribs, there's 7 pairs. Remember, true ribs were attached at the back to the spine. They're always attached to the thoracic vertebra anyway, but attached to the sternum in the front. And how many lumbar vertebrae are there? Now remember, your lumbar vertebrae are here in the middle, and they are there to help you to move. So think about all the different vertebrae. We have 7 cervical vertebrae. In fact, I'm going to just take you back to, I want you to be able to picture in your heads what it is you're looking at. You've got to learn your diagrams. Here we have our 7 cervical vertebrae. Then we have our 12 thoracic vertebrae. Why? Because of our ribs. We've got 7 pairs of ribs, and then we have 5. Okay, so we got 3 false ribs and 2 floating ribs, but they are not true ribs. So if there's 7 ribs together, 7 ribs and 5 ribs, they're 12 ribs, and those ribs are all attached to your thoracic vertebra, so there must be 12. Okay, if we look at, we've already got 7 cervical vertebra, plus 12 is 19. So between this now, we have 24 vertebrae that we still have to account for. Caudals, we have 4. Sacral, there are 5 fused. So your lumbar vertebrae are going to make up the difference between 23 and 28. So there are 5 lumbar vertebrae. And the minute you start putting numbers to it and using your common sense, you don't have to learn. It's there. It'll come naturally. So 7 cervical vertebrae is what you need to know, and 12 thoracic, and 5 sacral, so the lumbar, clearly there are 5, and 4 little caudal vertebrae. Okay, people, so we've got our 7 pairs of ribs. Remember, true ribs, 5 false and floating ribs, and then our lumbar vertebra, they're going to be 5, and that's where we get our lumbar punches from. All right. Okay, so that's it for today. We're going to pick up with part 2 shortly, and you'll then be able to do the rest of the joints and all the joints that hold this skeleton so that it is able to move and it is able to protect all our organs. Okay, until next time, have a good one. Bye-bye.